The morning air inside Kensington Palace was cold and still. Princess Charlotte stood in the grand corridor, her small hands folded neatly in front of her dress. She was only 8 years old, but she had learned early that being a princess meant standing perfectly still. It meant smiling when cameras flashed. It meant never complaining, even when her feet hurt. Today was important. Very important. Hundreds of guests were arriving for the annual Royal Garden reception. Ambassadors, dignitaries, photographers, and journalists from all over the world. Charlotte would walk alongside her parents and greet them all with grace. She had practiced her curtsy a dozen times that morning. Her mother had brushed her hair until it shined. Everything had to be perfect, but something felt wrong. Charlotte looked down at her dress. It was a beautiful pale blue with delicate lace along the sleeves. Her shoes were polished white, buckled snugly at the sides. She had worn this outfit before, at another event last spring. It fit perfectly then. But now, standing in the hallway, something felt tight. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The waistband pressed into her ribs. She took a shallow breath and tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe she was imagining it. A voice called from down the corridor. 5 minutes, Your Highness. Charlotte's heart began to race. 5 minutes until she stepped outside. 5 minutes until the cameras turned toward her. 5 minutes until the world was watching. She glanced at her reflection in the tall mirror by the doorway. From the outside, she looked perfect, poised, royal. But inside, a quiet panic was building. The dress was too tight. She could feel it now with every breath. The zipper pressed against her spine. The fabric pulled at her shoulders. What if something went wrong? What if the zipper broke? What if everyone saw? Before you find out what happens next, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss stories like this. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this one will stay with you, Charlotte. Swallowed hard and tried to steady herself. She had been taught never to complain, never to make a scene. A princess didn't panic. A princess didn't cry. So she stood there, silent and still. Even as her chest grew tighter with every passing second, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Her mother appeared elegant and calm, adjusting her own gloves. She smiled warmly at Charlotte. You look lovely, darling. Are you ready? Charlotte nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Her mother didn't notice. She turned and began walking toward the grand entrance. Charlotte followed, her small shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. But with each step, the tightness grew worse, and then she felt it. A small pull, a stretch. The sound of stitching straining against fabric. Charlotte froze. No one else heard it, but she did. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She stood completely still, afraid to move. The stitching along the back seam had pulled. Not torn, not yet, but it was close. She could feel the tension in the fabric, like a thread about to snap. Her mother was already 10 steps ahead, gliding toward the entrance where the royal staff waited. Charlotte wanted to call out to say something, but the words stuck in her chest. What would she even say? That her dress didn't fit? That she had grown too much since last spring? It sounded so small, so foolish. She forced herself to take another step, then another. The fabric stretched with every movement. She could feel the seam pulling tighter, threatening to give way. Her face burned with embarrassment even though nothing had happened yet. Not yet. The corridor opened into the grand foyer, where palace staff lined the walls. Photographers adjusted their cameras near the doorway. Outside, through the tall windows, Charlotte could see the garden filled with guests. Silk dresses, tailored suits, flashing jewelry. Everyone was waiting for her. Charlotte's pulse hammered in her ears. She was supposed to walk out there with confidence, with grace. But all she could think about was the seam. What if it tore in front of everyone? What if the cameras caught it? What if the photos were everywhere by tonight? She had seen what happened when royals made mistakes, even small ones. The headlines, the mockery, the endless commentary. She was only 8, but she understood. One mistake, and the world would remember. Her mother turned back and smiled. "Come along, Charlotte. They're ready for us." Charlotte's legs felt like stone. She couldn't move. If she took another step, the dress might rip. But if she didn't move, everyone would notice. They would ask questions. They would wonder what was wrong. She was trapped, and then, in the corner of her eye, she saw him. A palace guard stood near the far wall, tall and silent in his formal uniform. His face was stoic, unreadable as all the guards were trained to be. He wasn't supposed to speak to the royal family unless addressed. He wasn't supposed to interfere, but his eyes met Charlotte's, and something in his expression changed. It was subtle. A flicker of concern. A slight shift in his posture. He had noticed. Somehow he had seen what no one else had. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw the way she stood frozen, afraid to move. Charlotte didn't know his name. She had never spoken to him before. But in that moment, he was the only person in the entire palace who understood. The guard glanced toward the doorway, where her mother and the other staff were waiting. Then he looked back at Charlotte. Slowly, carefully, he took a step forward. It was a risk. Guards didn't break protocol. They didn't approach the royal family without permission, but he did it anyway. He moved closer, his boots silent on the marble floor. When he was just a few feet away, he stopped. His voice was low, barely more than a whisper. "Your Highness." Charlotte looked up at him, her eyes wide with panic. The guard's expression softened. "Your dress," he said quietly. "The seam is pulling." Charlotte felt her throat tighten. She nodded, unable to speak. The guard glanced around. No one was watching them. Everyone's attention was on the entrance, on the ceremony about to begin. He leaned in slightly, his voice even softer now. "If you walk out there, it will tear." Shh. She already knew, but hearing it out loud made it real. "What do I do?" she whispered. The guard hesitated. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a broad smile, just a small, reassuring one. The kind that said, "Don't worry, I have an idea." The guard glanced toward the entrance once more, then back at Charlotte. His voice was calm, steady, like he dealt with royal crises every day. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't move. I'll be right back." Before Charlotte could respond, he turned and walked swiftly toward a side door. He didn't run. He didn't draw attention. He simply moved with purpose, disappearing into the service corridor beyond. Charlotte stood frozen. Her mother was still near the entrance, speaking quietly with one of the staff members. No one had noticed yet, but they would. Any second now, someone would turn around and wonder why the princess hadn't followed. Her hands trembled. She pressed them together, trying to stay composed. A princess doesn't panic. A princess doesn't cry. But inside, she was screaming. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. It felt like forever. Where did he go? What if he didn't come back? What if she had to walk out there anyway, hoping the dress would hold, praying it wouldn't rip in front of hundreds of people and dozens of cameras? Then, just as her mother began to turn around, the guard reappeared. He moved quickly, but quietly, slipping back into the foyer. In his hand was a small sewing kit, the kind the palace staff kept for emergency repairs. He approached Charlotte and knelt down beside her, his movements smooth and deliberate. "Turn slightly," he whispered. "Just a little. Pretend you're adjusting your shoe." Charlotte did as he said. She shifted her weight and bent down slightly, as if fixing the buckle on her shoe. It gave the guard just enough cover to work. His hands moved fast. He opened the sewing kit and pulled out a needle already threaded with pale blue thread. He didn't have much time. Maybe 2 minutes before someone noticed. Charlotte held her breath. She could feel the tension in the fabric, the seam barely holding. The guard worked with surprising skill, his fingers steady as he reinforced the stitching along the back. He didn't try to fix the entire dress. He just focused on the weakest point, the place where the seam had started to pull apart. 30 seconds, 45. A full. Charlotte's mother glanced back. "Charlotte, are you all right?" Charlotte's heart leaped into her throat. She looked up and forced a smile. "Yes, Mama. Just my shoe." Mother nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the staff. The guard tied off the thread and tucked the needle back into the kit. He stood up slowly, his expression calm and professional, as if nothing unusual had just happened. "It will hold," he whispered. "But walk carefully. Small steps. Don't stretch." Charlotte looked up at him, her eyes shining with relief. "Thank you," she breathed. The guard gave her the smallest nod. Then he stepped back into position along the wall, his face returning to the same stoic, unreadable expression all the guards wore. Charlotte took a deep breath. The tightness in her chest began to ease. The panic that had gripped her just moments ago started to fade. She wasn't going to be humiliated. She wasn't going to be the princess who ripped her dress in front of the world. She was going to be fine. Her mother turned and extended a hand. "Ready now, darling?" Charlotte nodded. This time she meant it. She walked forward, taking small, careful steps, just as the guard had instructed. The dress held. The seam didn't pull. She reached her mother's side, and together they moved toward the grand entrance. The doors opened. Sunlight poured in. The sound of applause filled the air. Cameras flashed. Guests turned to look. Princess Charlotte stepped outside, her head held high, her smile perfect. No one knew how close she had come to disaster. No one except the guard. As Charlotte walked past the rows of guests, greeting ambassadors and dignitaries with practiced grace, she couldn't help but glance back toward the entrance. The guard was still there, standing at attention, watching over the event like he always did. But now, when their eyes met, something was different. She wasn't just a princess, and he wasn't just a guard. He was the man who had saved her. The reception lasted 2 hours. Charlotte shook hands, curtsied, and smiled for photographs. She answered polite questions from ambassadors and listened to long speeches from dignitaries. Every moment, she was careful. Small steps. No sudden movements. The dress held perfectly, but her mind kept returning to the guard. She wanted to thank him properly, to tell him how much his help had meant, but royal protocol didn't allow for that. Guards were part of the palace, like the walls and the paintings. They were always there, always watching, but never truly seen. Still, every time she glanced back toward the entrance, she found him. He never moved from his post, never broke his stance. But once, just once, when their eyes met across the garden, he gave her the smallest nod. It said, "You did well." And Charlotte felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. When the reception finally ended, Charlotte walked back inside with her family. Her feet ached. Her face hurt from smiling. But she had made it through. No disasters. No headlines. Just another successful royal event. Her mother kissed her forehead. "You were perfect today, darling." "I'm very proud," Charlotte smiled. If only her mother knew, that evening. After she had changed out of the pale blue dress and into her comfortable pajamas, Charlotte sat by her bedroom window. The palace grounds were quiet now. The guests were gone. The cameras were packed away. Everything had returned to normal. But Charlotte couldn't stop thinking about the guard. She didn't even know his name. The next morning, Charlotte woke early. She dressed quickly and slipped out of her room before anyone could stop her. She had a plan. A small, slightly dangerous plan. She made her way through the palace corridors, moving quietly past staff members and other guards. She knew where she was going. The guard rotations were predictable. If he was on duty yesterday morning, he would likely be stationed somewhere in the same wing today. She found him near the west entrance, standing at attention in full uniform. He didn't see her approach at first. He was staring straight ahead, as guards were trained to do. Charlotte stopped a few feet away. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear this time. From determination. "Excuse me," she said softly. The guard's eyes shifted toward her. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly hidden. He straightened even more, if that was possible. "Your Highness," he said, his voice formal. Charlotte stepped closer. She glanced around to make sure no one else was nearby. Then she looked up at him. "I never got to thank you properly," she said. "For yesterday." The guard's expression softened. "It was my duty, Your Highness." "No," Charlotte said firmly. "It was more than that. You didn't have to help me. You could have just let it happen. But you didn't." The guard was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice quieter now. "I have a daughter your age. I saw the fear in your eyes. I couldn't just stand there." Charlotte felt a lump form in her throat. A daughter. He had a daughter who was 8 years old, just like her. A daughter who probably worried about fitting in, about making mistakes, about being perfect. "What's your name?" Charlotte asked. The guard hesitated. Guards weren't supposed to share personal details with the royal family. But something in Charlotte's eyes made him answer. "Thomas, Your Highness." "Thomas Calloway." Sella smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I won't forget what you did." Thomas nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're welcome, Your Highness." Charlotte turned to leave, but then she paused. She looked back at him. "Do you think?" She hesitated. "Do you think it's okay to be scared sometimes? Even if you're supposed to be brave?" Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he knelt down, bringing himself to her level. His voice was gentle. "Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared," he said. "It means you keep going even when you are. You were very brave yesterday, Your Highness. Don't ever doubt that." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Then she did something that would have horrified the palace staff if they had seen it. She stepped forward and hugged him. Just for a moment, just long enough to say what words couldn't. Thomas froze, clearly shocked. But then, very carefully, he patted her shoulder. "Go on now," he whispered. "Before someone sees." Charlotte pulled back and smiled. Then she turned and hurried down the corridor, her heart lighter than it had been in days. Weeks passed. Summer turned to autumn. The palace routines continued as they always did. Charlotte attended lessons, public events, and family dinners. She curtsied for dignitaries and posed for photographs. On the outside, everything was the same. But inside, something had changed. Charlotte noticed things now. Things she had never paid attention to before. The guards who stood silently in hallways. The staff who prepared rooms and served meals. The drivers who waited patiently for hours. All the people who worked behind the scenes, making the palace run smoothly while staying invisible. She began to say good morning to them, to thank them when they held doors. Small gestures, but ones that made them pause and smile, her mother noticed. "You're being very polite to the staff lately," she said one evening at dinner. Charlotte shrugged, trying to act casual. "They work hard. I thought it was nice to say thank you." Her mother studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "That's very kind of you, darling. It's important to remember that everyone deserves respect, no matter their position." Charlotte thought of Thomas. He would be proud. She saw him occasionally in the corridors, always at his post, always professional. They never spoke again after that morning. It wouldn't have been appropriate, but sometimes their eyes would meet, and Thomas would give her that same small nod. "You're doing well," and Charlotte would stand a little taller. Then, one cold November morning, everything changed again. Charlotte was walking through the portrait gallery when she heard raised voices. Angry voices. She paused, pressing herself against the wall near a large painting of Queen Victoria. "I don't care what the protocol is," a man's voice said sharply. "I want to know who authorized this." Charlotte peeked around the corner. 3 senior palace officials stood in the corridor, their faces tight with disapproval. And standing before them, rigid and pale, was Thomas. "I acted on instinct, sir," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the tension. "The situation required immediate attention." "You broke protocol," one of the officials said coldly. "You approached a member of the royal family without permission. You made physical contact. Do you understand how serious this is?" Charlotte's heart plummeted. They were talking about that day. About the dress? About Thomas helping her? Someone must have seen Someone must have reported it. I understand, sir, Thomas said, but I would do it again. Princess Charlotte was in distress. I couldn't stand by, and that's not your decision to make, another official interrupted. Your job is to protect the royal family from external threats, not to involve yourself in their personal matters. Charlotte's hands balled into fists. This wasn't fair. Thomas had helped her. He had saved her from humiliation. And now he was being punished for it? We have no choice, the first official said. You'll be reassigned. Effective immediately. Reassigned. That meant he would be sent away from Kensington Palace. Away from his post, maybe even dismissed entirely. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I understand, sir. Charlotte couldn't breathe. She wanted to run out there, to tell them they were wrong, that Thomas had done nothing wrong. But she was 8 years old. Child. What could she possibly say that would change their minds? The officials turned and walked away, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. Thomas remained standing there, alone, his shoulders slightly slumped. Charlotte stepped out from behind the painting. Mr. Calloway? Thomas looked up, startled. When he saw her, his expression softened. Your Highness, you shouldn't be here. Charlotte walked toward him, her chin lifted with determination. They can't send you away, you were helping me. Thomas knelt down so they were eye level. It's all right, he said gently. I knew the risks. I don't regret it. But it's not fair, Charlotte said, her voice breaking. You did the right thing. Thomas smiled, a real smile this time, warm and sad. Sometimes doing the right thing has consequences, but that doesn't make it less right. Charlotte felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, but more came. I don't want you to go, I know, Thomas said softly. But you'll be fine. You're braver than you think, Your Highness. You don't need me watching over you. Charlotte shook her head. She wanted to argue, to say that she did need him. That he was more than just a guard. Was the person who had seen her when no one else did, who had cared when no one else noticed. But before she could speak, footsteps sounded in the corridor behind them. Thomas stood quickly, returning to his formal stance. Charlotte's mother appeared, elegant and composed as always. She looked at Charlotte, then at Thomas, her expression unreadable. Charlotte, she said calmly, come with me, please. Charlotte glanced back at Thomas one last time, gave her that small nod. Be brave. Then Charlotte turned and followed her mother down the corridor, her heart breaking with every step. Charlotte followed her mother in silence. They walked through the palace corridors, past paintings and windows and guards standing at attention. Charlotte's mind raced. Should she explain? Should she defend Thomas? Would her mother even listen? They entered a small private sitting room. Her mother closed the door and turned to face her. Charlotte braced herself for a lecture. For disappointment. For being told she shouldn't have gotten involved, but her mother's expression wasn't angry. It was thoughtful. Tell me what happened, her mother said quietly. The day of the garden reception, the truth. Charlotte hesitated, but there was no point in lying, not now. She told her everything. The tight dress, the seam pulling, the panic she felt knowing hundreds of people were watching. Thomas, who noticed when no one else did, who risked his position to help her. When she finished, her mother was silent for a long moment. Then she sat down on the sofa and patted the space beside her. Charlotte sat, her heart pounding. Do you know why protocol exists? Her mother asked. Charlotte shook her head. It exists to protect you, her mother said. To create boundaries between our family and everyone else. To keep you safe from people who might take advantage of their proximity to power. Charlotte looked down at her hands. Mr. Calloway wasn't trying to take advantage. He was just being kind. I know, her mother said softly. And that's what makes this complicated. She reached over and took Charlotte's hand. But here's what you need to understand, darling. Being royal means living in a world where kindness can be misunderstood, where a simple act of help can be seen as overstepping. It's not fair, but it's our reality. Charlotte felt tears welling up again. So they're going to send him away? Because he helped me? Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood. Wait here, She left the room and Charlotte sat alone, her chest tight with worry. Minutes passed like hours. She stared at the paintings on the walls, at the afternoon light filtering through the windows, wondering if she had just made everything worse. Then the door opened. Her mother returned, and behind her were the 3 palace officials from earlier. Charlotte stood quickly, her pulse racing. The head official looked at her, his expression stern. "Your Highness," he said formally, "your mother has informed us of the circumstances regarding the incident at the garden reception." Charlotte held her breath. While Guard Calloway's actions were unorthodox, the official continued slowly. "We acknowledge that he acted with the princess's well-being in mind. Given the unique nature of the situation, we have decided to withdraw the reassignment." Charlotte's heart leaped. "He can stay." The official's expression softened just slightly. "He can stay. But he will receive a formal reminder about protocol. This cannot happen again." Charlotte wanted to throw her arms around her mother, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, even though she felt like crying with relief. "Thank you so much." The officials nodded and left the room. The door closed behind them. Charlotte turned to her mother, her eyes shining. "How did you?" Her mother smiled. "I told them that Guard Calloway prevented a situation that could have resulted in international headlines. That his quick thinking protected not just you, but the reputation of the entire family." "Sometimes," she said gently, "protocol needs to make room for common sense." Charlotte hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you, Mama." Her mother held her close. "You were right to tell me," she whispered, "and you were right to recognize kindness when you saw it." That evening, Charlotte found Thomas at his usual post near the west entrance. He stood at attention as always, but when he saw her approaching, surprise flickered in his eyes. "Your Highness," he said, bowing his head slightly. Charlotte stopped in front of him, a smile spreading across her face. "You're staying?" Thomas blinked. Yes, I was informed this afternoon." "I don't quite understand. My mother spoke to them," Charlotte said. "She told them you were protecting me, that what you did was important." Thomas looked genuinely moved. He cleared his throat. "Please thank Her Royal Highness for me." Charlotte nodded. Then she looked up at him seriously. "Mr. Calloway, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Your Highness." "Your daughter," Charlotte said. "What would you tell her if she was scared? If she didn't know if she was brave enough?" Thomas thought for a moment. Then he smiled. "I'd tell her that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to do what's right, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when no one's watching." Charlotte felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Thomas bowed his head. "It was my honor, Your Highness." As Charlotte walked away, she felt different, lighter. She realized that being a princess wasn't just about perfect curtsies and polished shoes. It wasn't just about standing still and smiling for cameras. It was about recognizing when someone showed you kindness. It's about standing up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. About understanding that everyone, from guards to ambassadors, deserved to be seen. Thomas had saved her from humiliation that day in the corridor. But in the weeks that followed, she realized he had given her something even more valuable. He had shown her what true courage looked like. Years later, when Charlotte was older and attending more formal events, she would still see Thomas occasionally. He would be at his post, standing tall and professional, watching over the palace as he always had, and whenever their eyes met, he would give her that same small nod. "You're doing well," and Charlotte would smile, knowing that she was. It's not because she was perfect. Not because she never made mistakes, but because she had learned that being royal meant more than following protocol. It meant having the courage to see people, to thank them, to remember that behind every uniform, every title, every role was a human being who deserved kindness. A guard's whisper had saved Princess Charlotte from a disaster that day, but in the end, it was the guard himself who taught her the most important lesson of all, that true nobility isn't. It's about bloodlines or crowns. It's about how you treat people when no one's looking. And that's a lesson worth remembering.